Good afternoon. On today's Angry Bulletin. Last month, the Pentagon released their consolidated annual report on UAPs, documenting 274 new reports that came into the Pentagon and 291, including 17 that occurred from previous reporting periods. That's a hell of a lot of reports, but did they really discover anything from all of that? And meanwhile, in other UFO news, a famous piece of footage released by the Pentagon not too long ago appears to have been explained, and explained by the most unlikely group of people. Is this for real? All of this and more coming at you on The Angry Astronaut right now. Good afternoon. Once again, welcome to The Angry Astronaut. Coming at you once again, sans sunglasses. That's probably going to be the case for a lot of my more serious videos, my UFO videos, especially right now. Again, not to turn off some of the new viewers that might judge me according to such things. Seems ridiculous that they would, but still, it's a sort of thing that comes up from time to time. Also, want to do a shout out to my UK viewers. Some of you may have noticed this little pin in a previous UAP video that I did. Remembrance Day is an extremely important event here in the United Kingdom, commemorating all of the lives lost in the First World War. And by the way, my grandfather actually served in the Great War in 1917, and a series of miracles led to him surviving that war when so many of his fellow comrades and friends did not in the Ardennes. But that is a story for another time. In the meantime, however, what about this recent report from the Pentagon? Over 200 new UFO cases have been submitted for analysis from various government sources, and these submissions have revealed lots of interesting details about UAPs and their general behavior, where they tend to be found, and what we have learned about them thus far. And some things have proven to be very interesting. For example, some of the conclusions that have been made or fears that have been expressed are in regards to what kind of threat these things might present to air traffic. And interestingly enough, it appears that whatever these objects are, they aren't really behaving in a way that could actually endanger anybody's lives. And again, this should probably surprise no one. The report covers UAP sightings from August 31st, 2022 to April 30th, 2023, and all UAP reports from any previous time periods that were not included in an earlier report. The total number of reports were 291, including 17 that occurred during a previous reporting period from 2019 until 2022. That's a hell of a lot of reports coming into the government. Obviously, the vast majority of these were easily explained, either meteors or commercial aircraft being misreported, that sort of thing. This particular footage, for example, has been confirmed, or at least is strongly suspected, as being a commercial aircraft flying by another commercial aircraft, with an additional strange thing appearing in the footage as simply being a sensor artifact resultant of video compression. And frustratingly, these are the kinds of videos that you see on the Arrow site for the most part, not too many unexplained ones. Then there are apparently many unexplained videos that have yet to be released to the public, allegedly because such videos would also reveal the surveillance capabilities of many of our drones. However, in the process of collecting all of these reports, certain trends have begun to emerge. For one thing, we definitely have what's called a collection bias. Most reports still reflect a bias towards restricted military airspace, a result of reporting from military personnel and sensors present in such areas. In other words, Arrow doesn't believe that UFOs are paying close attention to our military capabilities. It's only because we have more military surveillance surveillance in these areas that we have more sightings. This bias has apparently been lessened by reporting from commercial pilots, showing a more diverse geographic distribution of UAP sightings. However, these reports mostly cover observations over U.S. airspace and also its associated territorial waters. Therefore, as these reports continue to come in, a U.S.-centric collection bias will grow significantly relative to the rest of the world. I tend to agree with that assessment. This needs to be an international effort. So during this reported period, by the way, no reports indicating UAP sightings have been associated with any adverse health effects. So these prior stories that you've heard about UFO sightings that involve things like radiation burns, well, this doesn't seem to be associated with any of these recent reports. However, this is in stark contrast to the reports produced by another investigation program known as the Advanced Aviation Threat Identification Program that closed down in 2012. That particular report had dozens of cases where adverse medical effects in regards to UFO sightings were reported. So is Arrow saying that these medical conditions are only associated with older reports and not the new ones? Or are they simply not telling us everything? Well, we'll get to that in a little bit. Back to the report. Of the 801 reported incidents, certain trends have started to appear. First of all, 25% of the objects reported apparently seem to be round orbs of some kind. By the way, 53% of the objects have no reported shape whatsoever. Perhaps they're just lights or something like that. Again, that is not made clear. 5% of the encounters are an ambiguous sensor contact of some kind. In other words, no visual confirmation, just radar of some kind. Triangular is really unusual. 1%, rectangle 2%, irregular shape 6%, a cylinder, interestingly enough, only 1% of the cases. And even though lights are oftentimes associated with UFO sightings, the UAP sightings that have been submitted to the Pentagon seem to be generally devoid of this feature. Only 21% of the sightings involve the use of lights, 79% do not. Now, many people would suggest that that's an obvious thing. Why would UAPs use lights if they wanted to conceal their presence? However, there's another thing that I wanted to talk about in regards to the Phoenix Lights incident. If you're visiting a primitive planet and if your ship is cloaked in such a way that makes it undetectable by radar, which is the case with many of these incidents, then why not put lights on your ship to keep their primitive aircraft from crashing into you? That's something you definitely wouldn't want to have happen, especially if you were conducting a peaceful visit. In any event, that's one possible explanation as to why alien visitors would put lights on their ship. Now, the altitude distribution of UAPs is not very surprising either. You're looking at the vast majority of them being spotted at the altitude of commercial air traffic or below, with approximately 3% being reported above the altitude of typical commercial air traffic, which in theory could be associated with weather balloons. Although really, I think in many of these cases, weather balloons are an unlikely explanation given the behavior of some of these craft, especially their flight capabilities and their abilities to move against the wind, but once again, that's another matter. Now, significantly, Arrow is starting to receive reports from the FAA as well, over 100 of them over the United States and its territorial waters. Of these reports, the vast majority have concerned sightings of unidentified lights without specific shape at widely varying estimated altitudes from less than 5,000 feet up to 60,000 feet. However, none of these reports suggest that the UAP were exhibiting anomalous characteristics or maneuvered to an unsafe proximity to civilian aircraft or posed a threat to flight safety to the observing aircraft. Nevertheless, it's a good thing that the FAA is finally starting to contribute to all of this. Now, unsurprisingly, Arrow's analysis of all of these reports suggests that only a very small percentage of UAP reports display interesting signatures, such as high-speed travel and unknown morphologies. However, again, I think it's very significant to note that some of these reports do exhibit this kind of behavior. So Arrow is taking this seriously, and some of these reports remain unsolved and seem to be exhibiting behavior that are not consistent with commercial aircraft or any technology that we are familiar with. Arrow also provided details as to how they resolve some of these sightings, especially in regards to sightings that can be explained. For example, the Western United States case on the 8th of May, 2023. And yeah, that's a really inventive name, but nevertheless, this is the military we're talking about. Military personnel in this particular case reported seeing 5 equidistant lights that they believed represented a potential incursion into restricted military airspace. However, analysis of the object's positions and acquisition of additional data led Arrow to the conclusion that the objects were significantly farther from the platform than originally estimated by the observers. After further analysis, it was determined that the objects correlated to specific commercial aircraft traveling on different air routes up to 300 nautical miles from the sensor. In other words, nothing special to report, and strange that these military personnel misidentified such an obvious collection of lights associated with commercial aircraft, but it does indicate that sometimes even trained military personnel can misinterpret the distance of objects that they observe. And by the way, it's that particular detail that I'd like you to keep in mind while we transition to an unexplained Arrow incident that has supposedly been explained not by the military, not by trained military observers, but by analysts who are sitting at home making use of Google Earth and their calculators. And incidentally, even though they don't have a whole lot of professional qualifications, these people are being regarded as an incredibly innovative bunch of investigators who have uncovered one of the most interesting UAP cases as being nothing more than a Mylar balloon. The group is called Bellingcat, a group of Netherlands-based investigative journalists who employ open source intelligence in their investigations, and they had this to say, quote, "When the U.S. Department of Defense published a video seemingly showing a UFO in the Middle East, Bellingcat contributor Nathan Patin, I believe, or Patan, and researcher Logan Williams went to work using open source techniques to verify claims of the unidentified flying object." This is according to Bellingcat's X account, by the way. Utilizing Google Earth, the group was able to track down exactly where in Syria this incident supposedly took place, and relying on structures that appeared in the video, they were able to use Google Earth measurements to produce an estimate for the size of the small metallic sphere that appears in the video, which they say indicated that the UAP has a maximum diameter of approximately 0.43 meters or smaller due to its, small spelling error there, unknown elevation height. According to Arrow's own list of typical UAP characteristics, UAPs are typically between 1 and 4 meters in size. And they also propose that while the object appears to be moving very quickly in the video, over 110 miles an hour, it's possible that it's actually remaining stationary, and the apparent motion is the result of parallax, which essentially describes the difference in the apparent relative position of an object when viewed from two different perspectives lines of sight. Given the time that this footage may have been gathered at roughly the same time that a regional festival takes place where lots of festive balloons are released, it was concluded that this is most probably a Mylar balloon. Case closed. As a matter of fact, on October 26th, Newsweek had a headline that read, "Mystery behind Pentagon UFO video appears to have been solved." A group of people working from their homes, utilizing calculators and Google Earth, have done what the military and all of their surveillance equipment could not. And by the way, there are a number of UFO investigators who are also applauding Bellingcat and claiming that the Pentagon is actually hiding all of the good stuff from us and releasing garbage like this. However, I don't really subscribe to that, although I applaud many of the investigative stories that Bellingcat has carried out. They may be a bit out of their depth here. First of all, we don't know the altitude of the MQ-9 Reaper aircraft that took this footage in the first place, so we can't really determine exactly what the size was of the object being observed. Not really. And to give you an idea of what I'm talking about here, have a look at this particular photo, or rather series of photos, that illustrates the concept of perspective in photography. The door to the right appears to be roughly the same size as the window to the left, again based on our perspective. However, when you look at these two images head on, you see that the window is actually significantly larger than the door. And this trick of perspective works with distance too. For example, look at these two glass spheres. Being looked at from a fairly close perspective, they look to be very different in size simply because one is substantially closer to us than the other. However, if you move the perspective back a couple of meters, then you start to see the truth. The objects are actually identical in size, or at least it's pretty easy to see that once you move a substantial distance away from both of them. This is why it's very dangerous to try to estimate sizes based on photographs with an unknown perspective, an unknown distance from the objects being photographed, and other factors that have an impact on the approximate measurements of this object. Even though they are comparing the size of the object to 11-meter walls, or however long these walls apparently are according to Google Earth, the perspective may be throwing off our measurements a bit. It's a dangerous thing to do if you don't have all the facts, which the people at Bellingcat most definitely do not have. The altitude of the Reaper is unknown. The speed of the Reaper is unknown. The focal length of the camera being used is unknown. Yeah, that can have an impact on relative size as well. There are so many unknown factors in this short little piece of footage that it's very difficult to positively identify anything that we're looking at, which is what the people at Bellingcat are trying to do, and it's something that's being embraced by the media as the gospel truth, which once again is simply because they're giving a mundane explanation for something that is unexplained, and that's something that the media loves to latch onto. But Bellingcat has an agenda. They always have. They like to uncover government conspiracies. They love to expose governments when they're lying to us. And although I'm totally in favor of that, I'm not sure that's what's happening in this particular case. Surely, the Pentagon is aware of the fact that mylar balloons are common in this area, especially at the time of this particular festival. Surely, the Pentagon knows the difference between a mylar balloon traveling on the wind and something very different. If it was something this damn obvious, the Pentagon would not be so foolish as to try to pass this off as a legitimately unexplained UAP event, especially when under oath in front of Congress. And by the way, the UFO investigators who are also embracing this explanation, well, I'm afraid they have a bit of an agenda too. They would like to believe that the government is concealing the real truth from us, the juicy UAP footage. And even though that might be the case, that doesn't mean that this particular sequence of footage is illegitimate. And this is something that has really annoyed the hell out of me when it comes to debunking UFO claims. Nobody ever really looks at the explanations that are presented for various UAP sightings with any sort of critical eye. Really, when you look at some of these explanations, sometimes they can be more full of holes than the idea that they've been sent from another world. And nobody really takes a critical approach to these sorts of things, nor do they even look at the potential motivations for the people who might be putting out these analyses that supposedly debunk these famous sightings. And not only do I find this to be extremely annoying, it's also just bad journalism. If we are to make a serious analysis of what appears to be happening in our skies, and if we are to try to discover the truth, we need to take an even-handed approach to the analysis, and we need to be just as critical of the mundane explanations that come out for these objects as we are of the fantastic explanations. And until we actually do that, we're never going to be treating this as a serious discipline or a serious scientific pursuit. Rather, it's just going to be a lot of name-calling and a lot of people trying to discredit one another. So please consider joining Ryland Bingham and David Bradley, who recently became part of my Patreon community. Thank you so much, because that's what allows me to make all of this content happen. Also, please please subscribe, guys. Really important to the success of my channel. And as always, stay angry about space.